I need this one too, yeah? Wait. So I need to put this on so I can hear. A lot of audio video stuff here. Okay. I don't need these. Okay.
No, just plug over there, give to me. When the Brazilian speakers,
oh, okay, so
the phone.
Perfect.
Do you have money here or not?
Yeah, dude, don't steal it.
Okay.
So, oh, all right, that's good. I have no idea. I should have kept that on for the introduction so I knew what anybody said, but I don't know, so that's okay. And I'll just let, where's, Bruno is just going, you're all set and you're just translating away so I can just talk and don't worry about it. Perfect. So first, thank you for coming. I think I don't know if they have Santa Claus in Brazil, but that's what I feel like, taking pictures here with a couple hundred people. But it's an incredible feeling. Stu and I were just talking about it, to have people come out and treat you the way that you guys treat us coming here. So it's a real honor to be here. I want to thank, obviously, you know, Carlos and Erica, and then all the blue shirt people that are roaming around here, all of his Perform Better Brazil people, for really, I mean, going like way out of their way to make this nice for us. And okay, so, and I guess so he's going to translate as fast as I talk. Normally we would have to stop, no, but we don't have to worry about that. Nope, he's just going. So perfect. This is going to be real. This will be easier than anything I've ever done in a foreign country. And as I said, I want to thank all of you guys for being here. It's just, it's a pretty cool thing, to be perfectly honest. So let's see if we can, I'm not a PC person, so, and it's really interesting because I look up there. If I don't look at my screen, it's in Portuguese, which isn't going to help me. But obviously, these are all the things that we have, you know, strengthcoach.com, websites, Body by Boyle online, our MBSC websites, our Perform Better stuff. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. When we talk about this idea of functional training, the one thing that we want you to understand is that we're basically doing this in every single sport. What we're going to talk about for this next hour and a half is what we do with everybody. So we've had world champions, national champions in American football, in basketball, in soccer, in baseball, in ice hockey, rowing, judo, gymnastics. It doesn't matter what sport, and I think that's the biggest thing that we have to get across, that, you know, when we start talking about the concept of functional training, is that it doesn't matter who you're doing it with. It basically makes no difference. So, you know, when you look at this, obviously we've done this in Major League Baseball. Sorry. You know, Premier League Soccer, this is Daniel Sturridge, who is now in Turkey playing for Trabzonspor, but was in Liverpool for a long time. I'm going to go back one, actually, to Ali Raisman, who was obviously Olympic gold medalist in women's gymnastics. And so it doesn't matter, we don't need the video to run. This is Kayla Harrison, who actually was Olympic gold medalist in women's judo. And the thing that I want you to understand, when you're looking at these people, whether you're looking at Kayla or whether you're looking at Ali or whether you're looking at, you know, David Ortiz, or you're looking at any of these people, conceptually what we're doing, it does not change very much. This is Hillary Knight, who is probably the best women's ice hockey player in the world. And just to give you some idea, hopefully Bruno can quickly do the math on this one, but she's about 5'10", about 170 pounds when you look at her. The next woman, Kayla Trainer, she's probably the best women's attack player in women's lacrosse in the world. Same way, probably about 5'10", 160 pounds. So, you know, we're doing this across genders, across sports. It doesn't make any difference. The last one is a guy named Rich Hill. Rich pitches for the Los Angeles Dodgers. And I think actually ended up, he's now one of the oldest pitchers in Major League Baseball, which is crazy. He is, I think he's 38 years old this year. Unfortunately, he's been injured a lot of the year, hasn't pitched a lot. But the biggest thing to understand when we talk about this idea of functional training is the concepts don't change. Anatomy doesn't change, physics doesn't change. So when we look at ourselves, we realize that, you know, everybody in here has the same body. Everybody in here has the same muscles. Everybody in here has the same joints. So when we start looking at all of these different people that we're coaching, it doesn't, like, it won't make any difference. And we're going to try to keep hammering that point home, I think, over the course of the weekend, that we're not worried about who we're training. We're going to worry about how we're going to train those people. And what we always said is 90% of what we do doesn't change. 10% might, like when you look sport to sport, 10% of what we might do for our baseball guys is going to be different. 10% of what we might do for an ice hockey player might be different. But I always said, if you walked into our facility and you watched people train, you would not be able to tell me what sport those people were. And there's a bunch of people here that have been here, you know, that have visited us and seen that. And I think they can attest to the fact that if you were walking around, you wouldn't be able to be like, okay, that's a basketball player. The basketball player, you would, because they're tall. But everybody else, not so much. And I think this idea is really important. If you can't explain it simply, you don't really understand it. I think there's too many people in our field trying to make this complicated. We're trying to do the polar opposite. We want this to be really simple so that when you walk away at the end of this weekend, I want you to think, yeah, this makes sense. It's perfectly obvious to me why they were telling me to do what you wanted to do. The one thing that I've realized is we talk about this idea of what's your lens? You know, if we're looking through a camera, how do you see things? How do you see training? You know, if you look at, like, for me, that's sort of the evolution of my life up there. You know, I think everybody starts out, you know, with the idea that they want to have big muscles, that they want to look good, they want to be able to go to the beach, right? And then eventually, particularly for males, they start thinking, I really want to be strong. And then I think as you get a little bit smarter, you think, no, I really want to be powerful like an Olympic lifter. And then as you start to understand the sports world, you start to look at that, you know, Ben Johnson, Carl Lewis, well, I think I really want to be fast. And then eventually you start to see the big picture and it all kind of comes together and you realize, okay, it's not one of those. It's not big muscles. It's not just strength. It's not just Olympic lifting. It's not just sprinting, but it's the combination of all that stuff that's going to make, whether it's the general population person healthy or the athletic population person perform better. No pun intended. But for me, just so you understand, I mean, I tend to see things through an ice hockey lens, which again, not a big Brazilian sport, but that's what I've spent the last 20 years of my life primarily doing, is training people for the sport of ice hockey. But the good thing, right? I've always been around really good thinkers. And this, I think that, you know, obviously, and I said this to, in the Q&A yesterday when we did the certification course, this is a little bit of what we would call in the US preaching to the choir. I don't know how well that translates into Brazilian, but hopefully my man Bruno in there is going to do a really good job explaining that. But I think you're here to learn from really smart people. And if you just take the example for me, that's all I've done my entire career. Like, you guys are being very kind and very generous to me here, but I always say that the reality is I'm a thief. Okay? I steal ideas from guys like this, and then I kind of put it all together into a system and say, hey, this is the way to do it. But when you look at whether it is Stuart McGill, whether it's Mark Verstegen, whether the two guys up there, Dan Dyrek and Donnie Strack, are guys that nobody knows probably if they're not in the NBA. Shirley Sarman, the little woman I have my arm around, is I would say, going on 80-year-old physical therapist. But it's that ability to find people smarter than you and to steal their stuff. That's what's going to make you successful, and that's why you're here. You know, you're here to steal my ideas, Dose's ideas, Sue's ideas, Mike's ideas, Kevin's ideas, Brendan's ideas. You're here to get ideas from other people and go back and incorporate them into what you're doing. And as we said yesterday in the certification, the people in this room today will be the people that will change the industry in Brazil. Because, you know, you guys will be the first wave of people who are thinking, oh, I get this. This makes perfect sense. And I say this all the time, the KISS principle. If you've ever read stuff that I've written, I say this over and over again. Keep it simple, stupid. It does not have to be complicated. There is a concept called Occam's razor, and basically it says that the simplest solution is often the best solution. And I think that's one of the things that you have to take away from this. The simplest solution is going to be the best solution. Generally, it's not going to be nearly as complicated as we want to make it. Before we get too far, I want to just I have to define the basics so that when we start talking about the next part, exercises, these things, we're all pretty much on the same page. So if we look at this idea, frontal plane divides me into front and back halves. Sagittal plane divides me down the middle. So most of the weight room, sagittal plane. Transverse plane is the rotational plane, and it really doesn't exist, because if you look at this transverse plane, it's like there's a transverse plane, you know, going all the way up. There's a transverse plane probably for every vertebrae, and each part of that transverse plane is going to move a little bit. But you need to understand that as we go forward. Actually, what I'm going to do, I just realized I don't need to see it. How long do you think I was going to work around this thing before I actually realized I could get it out of the way? Now that that's gone and I'm not doing this, that's going to make me a much better presenter. And you can feel free to laugh at me, that's okay. I don't take myself very seriously, so I do not expect you to take me very seriously. Oh, we already said that. So if we look, I mean, this next one, you know, let's go back one, please. So, just so that we understand sagittal plane. Right? It's, you know, it's 90% of what we do is going to be sagittally plane oriented stuff. But one of the things, and this is I think a huge idea that we talked about yesterday, when you think about functional training, if we look at the next video, I think this is a 3-plane exercise. Because these are all women that were on our, I think, 2010 Olympic team in women's ice hockey. But when we look at them, they're only moving in the sagittal plane, but they have to stabilize in the frontal plane. So as they one-leg squat, they have to keep their hips from sliding right to left. As they one-leg squat, they have to keep themselves from rotating. So when I always say anatomy is simple, and then in some ways anatomy is complicated, because we have to realize that in that exercise, there are muscles acting as stabilizers, there are muscles acting as neutralizers, there are muscles that are preventing action. And to me, that's the perfect example of why this whole idea of functional training works, because when I'm like that, when I'm on one leg, anatomically things are different than when I'm on 2 legs, just so that we get that part. And then here, frontal plane, right? Again, we probably don't do enough movement in the frontal plane. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So, and we can actually can we turn the volume off of the slides? We don't need them. That way we'll just get the visuals. That's going to be better. And then this is just another frontal plane example. So when we start thinking about people moving in the frontal plane, slide board, frontal plane. I think we don't do enough frontal plane. We need to do a lot more frontal plane just in general. But at the same time, we can't get carried too much away with the idea. And then I think we can look at just sort of some simple transverse plane stuff. And Sue might recognize this one. This is an oldie but a goodie video. I think probably 2003, Home Depot Center. The sad part, I don't remember her name, which is terrible. I should, but I guess I shouldn't remember people's names from 2003. But so what is functional training? This is the important thing. To me, functional training is applying what we know about functional anatomy to training. And the bad part, somebody asked me yesterday, is there a really good book on functional anatomy? And I said, no, there is not a really good book on functional anatomy. No one has done that yet. I hope somebody somewhere along the way does that. But I think you need to understand how the body works in order to understand how to exercise the body. If you don't, the way we were taught, well, actually, I'm going to get ahead of myself, so I'm not going to say that. So it's important that we get this. I always say function is purpose. So when someone says to me, what's something's function? I want to know what its purpose is. So if you think of the idea of functional training as being synonymous with purposeful training, and functional training to me is literally training muscles based on their function. Like, I know this muscle does this. Therefore, when I start picking exercises, I'm going to pick an exercise that does this. We're going to spend a lot of time on this. The problem for me, and I always said, so this was my first book, which was also 2004. And it's an interesting story because I got an email from Human Kinetics. I think it was an email. It could have actually been a letter. I don't know, in 2004. I'm not sure. I don't know how much emailing I was doing. But someone from Human Kinetics contacted me in 2004 and said, we want you to write a book on functional training. He thought that was really funny. What my response to that was, I don't know if I know what functional training is. I don't think I'm the right guy to write the book. And the guy then, the acquisitions editor, said, we think what you do is functional training. And I said, so I can write a book just detailing what we do, and you're going to call it functional training for sports and publish it. And he was like, yep, that's exactly what we're going to do. And I thought, okay, I'll just write the book and you'll call it functional training for sports. So for me, I kind of got stuck with this whole functional training idea. I didn't have any intention of being like the functional training guy, but I did want to write a book, and that was the title they were going to use. Interestingly enough, and I'm going to back up a page just so you can see, at that time we were doing work with Reebok, and Reebok paid for the photo shoot. And as a result, they wanted a picture of a guy on the cover on their Reebok core board. And that was probably the worst thing that could have happened to me in terms of that book, because what they were really looking, it almost gave people, some people never read the book. Some people said, oh, it's all about, balancing on stuff and being on one leg and closing one eye. And it wasn't like that at all. But people literally, there's an expression in the United States, I do not know if there is a Brazilian equivalent of don't judge a book by the cover, but a lot of people judge this book by the cover. And then, unfortunately, didn't even go. I had people who wrote critiques of the book and didn't read the book. I went back and read their critique, and then, of course, posted, because that's what I would do anyway, and just said, you didn't read the book, because the book isn't like that. There were 10 exercises in that book that used a stability ball at that time. And there were about 90 exercises that didn't. But for better or for worse, and maybe that's probably why I'm here, I'm stuck with this functional training thing. And I think because of that, I think functional training gets a bad rep. I think sometimes people think, if you're a serious strength coach, then you think guys like me are clowns. It's a joke. And that, everything is going to be like, standing on a Bosu ball and covering one eye and waving a dumbbell around. And that's not, in my mind, at all what functional training is about, okay? We want to make sure people train hard. We want to make sure people follow progressions. We want to make sure people lift weights. So, it was interesting. I had a conversation yesterday and someone was saying, the whole body weight thing is really catching on. Functional training isn't body weight training. Functional training might initially be body weight training because you have to learn to handle your body weight. But as soon as you can, you need to be adding additional load to that, because if you do body weight exercise all the time, after 3 weeks, that's not effective anymore, unless you're gaining weight. So if we want to go in the opposite vein and say, I want the training to be more effective, I need you to get fatter, progressive resistance, gain more weight, okay, so that you'll lift more weight. That doesn't work. So we need dumbbells, we need weight vests, there's all these external things that we need to create more load over and above. It's like I said, actually, I'll go on it. So if you watch Kelly here, and Kelly in 2010 was probably the best women's ice hockey player in the world. She had torn her left ACL. So this was what we were doing with her right leg during the course of her rehab. But if you look at her, she's got a weighted belt on. She's got dumbbells in her hand. She's got about 55 pounds of external load while she's single leg squatting. And we got to more than that as we went forward. Even if you look at here, this is one of my old personal training clients, my really good friend, Steve. And again, Steve is in this picture, I think he's 65 or 66 years old. He's now in his 70s. But we're doing the same thing. One leg squats, 5-pound dumbbells, trying to add external load, trying to get him to be better in that position. And that's the part that I want to get across to you guys, is that it doesn't matter if you say to me, okay, I've got a 90-year-old woman or I've got a 11-year-old athlete. We're not really going to do that much different with that person. Because even, and look at this, I mean, this is the other far end of the extreme. This is about 500 pounds. And I want you to watch, I mean, okay? And I could spend a lot of time getting really technical and talking about bilateral deficit, but what I want you to understand is that you can get really strong on one leg and you can get stronger. I 100% believe you can get stronger on one leg than you can on two. Your body knows what it's supposed to do. And I use this example all the time. If I asked anybody in here to try to run and touch the ceiling, everybody in here, almost, not everybody, 90% of you are going to jump off of your left leg and reach up with your right hand. Maybe 10% of you would just try to stand underneath and jump up off two legs. But if this whole double leg thing that we've been doing the last, whatever, 100 years really worked, why does everybody jump off one leg? Because the brain knows. The brain knows what's best. And if you look at it and think, if I could run and jump and touch the ceiling off of just my left leg, I should be able to hit my head off the ceiling off two legs, right? Except I can't. And most people can't jump higher off two legs than they can off one. And people say, oh, that's because the stretch shortening cycle, blah, blah, blah. It's still not twice as much. Why doesn't it work that way? And it doesn't work that way because that's not the way the brain works. The brain knows when we try to teach somebody to throw, people don't generally go like this. When we try to teach somebody to kick, the brain, we don't have to spend a lot of time telling somebody how their brain is supposed to do something. We just throw it out there and they do it right. Except in strength and conditioning, where we spend a huge amount of time trying to teach them to do it wrong. We spend a massive amount of time trying to rewire people's brains to make them kind of, I guess, backwards. Makes no sense. But you think about strong. This is pretty strong. That's 60 kilos. So 3 20-kilo plates. Again, not body weight exercise. Body weight plus, right? Once he could do 10 chin-ups, we said, okay, let's add some external load to that. And when he could do some, if we did a little more, we did a little more, we did a little more. There's nothing wrong with being strong. Watch Alex. This is Alex Carpenter, who's again one of our top U.S. ice hockey players. That's 20 kilos. She does 20 kilos for 7. Most of our female athletes can easily do bodyweight chin-ups, and again, the vast majority of them are doing externally loaded bodyweight chin-ups. I have one. I should have put. I didn't put her in here. I have one little girl that trains with my son who's 14. He'll throw a 10-kilo plate on and bang out 5 bodyweight chin-ups at 14 years old. So you still need to get strong. But again, I'm not against a little bit of unstable surface training, particularly as it applies to the upper body. I like this. If we watch, hopefully, is that going to run? Oh, there we go. And again, Bill's in his 70s. In this video, I think he's 65 years old. Feet elevated, we talked about push-up progression in the CFSC, but once he can do push-ups on the ground, we're going to elevate his feet. Once we can handle elevated feet, we may make the surface unstable for his upper body and add a Bosu ball. Once he can handle that, we're going to ask him to throw a weight vest on. We're constantly saying to people, you still need to get better. There's no point that we stop and say, okay, good enough. And you go back to that, that 500-pound one-leg squat, you can kind of see that. So let's define function. So if we think about this, how many activities do we do, besides listening to clowns like me, where we're sitting like this? From a movement standpoint, from a sporting standpoint, right? But how many machines are designed to have the person sitting down? Right? And the quote from Vern Gambetta and Gary Gray, single joint movements that isolate a specific muscle are very non-functional. Multi-joint exercises that integrate muscles into groups, into movement patterns are very functional. I mean, that's as simple as it can possibly get, okay? This is not very functional. We're not going to do a whole lot of things in life where we're going to move one joint at a time. But for a long time, we were taught, when I was in school, I was taught about the idea of you want to isolate a muscle. These guys came along, and really, when you think about it, you know, Gary Gray and Vern Gambetta were two of the real pioneers of this thing, probably late 90s, and started to say, wait a second, this is all wrong. You know, the last thing we want to do is find a machine that isolates a muscle. The last thing we want to do is get you sitting down in a machine to isolate a muscle. That's not going to happen. So when we think about sporting activities, life activities, whatever we're doing, we need to be on our feet. Life is on our feet. People need to be on their feet. People need to be standing. People need to be in split stance. They need to be in the right positions. So think about this. How many activities are performed by one joint acting in isolation? Try to think about how many, like I said, sort of daily living activities where you're like, okay, I'm going to try to just move my elbow today. Not a lot, right? And this is from the same article. Single joint movements that isolate a specific muscle are non-functional. It's not hard. So we look at this stuff, right? The definition, when I started writing this functional training for sports book, they were like, we want you to create a continuum of exercises. And I said, okay, the least functional exercise that I can think of is a seated single joint exercise. That's going to be the least functional thing possible, right? And if we look at that, right, if we ask ourselves, again, you know, how often does this happen? I'm going to have the same lame joke. Hopefully it translates well. If you were a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest, then you might need leg extensions. But otherwise, that's not going to happen. You know, how often do you say, I think I'm going to try to repeatedly kick myself in the ass today? Right? Never. That never happens. But what happened is, and this goes back, and I want to make sure, and this, so I'll just throw, doesn't need to be said, but it will be said. As a general rule, machines are less functional than free weight exercise. Again, it doesn't get any simpler than that, but I think that's kind of the essence of functional training. If you look, if we could throw a picture of MBSC up there, which I didn't really think about doing, we have almost no machinery. The only machinery we have are Kaiser machines for pulling, because we know we can't, you know, pulling is hard to do with body weight in a lot of the patterns that we want to get. The rest of the place is just dumbbells and kettlebells and benches and racks and, I mean, almost zero machinery. But, so let's get, the anatomical explanation is really important. And like I said, the understanding of functional anatomy validates the concept of functional training. When I start to understand functional anatomy, then functional training makes sense, right? So, I always said, when I teach, you know, when my class is functional anatomy 101, I'll show you. If I put my foot on the floor like this, every muscle does the exact same thing. It prevents my knee from hitting the stage. Okay, so as you know, if I walk forward, boom, I put my foot down, my quadricep, my glute, my hamstring, my calf, they all decelerate flexion of my ankle, knee, and hip. I can remember the first time I heard Gary Gray say this and just thinking, oh, he's so right. I can't believe I never thought about it that way. And some of you may be sitting here having that exact same epiphany, you know, 20 years later, thinking, oh, he's right. Because if you look at this and you ask yourself, okay, when I'm in this position, is my quadricep extending my knee? Is my hamstring flexing my knee? When I do this and I move forward, my quadricep's kind of extending my knee, but it's extending my hip, it's extending my knee, it's extending my ankle. It can't and it won't work on one joint at a time. So when we understand, particularly we start talking about lower body functional anatomy, the good thing is that when you took the old NASM test, the answer to every question was exactly the same, because someone could say, okay, you know, in stance phase, what does the quadricep do? And the answer was decelerates flexion of the ankle, knee, and hip. The next question could be, in the stance phase, what does the glute max do? And the answer would be, it prevents flexion of the ankle, knee, and hip. And then the next question would be, what does the calf do? It prevents flexion of the ankle, knee, and hip. The answer to every question was exactly the same, because all the muscles are doing the exact same thing in stance. And then when you turn around, well, okay, if I push off, what happens? All of those muscles create extension of the ankle, knee, and hip. They all do the same thing again. And I think a lot of times that's the hardest thing for people to conceptualize in their mind, is that this idea that function, like lower body functional anatomy, is pretty simple. And it almost, as you look at it, it invalidates all of the machine ideas, all of the isolation ideas. We talk about what we got taught in school, and again, I don't know how they teach anatomy in Brazil. When I was taught anatomy, I was taught what we would call dead person anatomy. And so dead person anatomy was kind of like, if you just had a dead body and you could just electrically stimulate the muscle, what's the action that you'd see? So, and you guys won't be able to see me that well, but if I was laying here, and I'll keep talking so you can hear me, and my legs are hanging off and I'm a dead person, and someone stimulates my quads, my leg's going to extend, right? The problem with that is the genius teaching said, quadricep extends the D, look. Then they flip the person over on their stomach, right? Dead person on their stomach, okay. Stimulate the hamstring, what happens? Oh, it's healing up to his butt. Hamstring flexes the knee. And this was all the stuff that we thought makes perfect sense, right? Boom, stick some electrodes on the stomach, crunch. Oh, so the abdominal muscles make you crunch. And it was all wrong. So the good thing about anatomy, all the origin and insertion stuff they showed you was right. All the function stuff they taught you was wrong. And you have to relearn the functions of the muscle. Okay, what does that muscle do? And that's going to be a lot of what we talk about. So, and this is basically what we said. But, sorry, and I'm going to jump through because I've already gone through this. But it's really important if you think, yes, there are going to be some muscles, as we talked about. Some muscles are going to be stabilizers. Some muscles are going to be neutralizers. But I can make functional anatomy more complicated, but that's not my goal for today. My goal is to make it really simple. And you just have to realize, basically, most of the muscles are doing the same thing when we start looking at lower body. Okay? When we start thinking about, hamstrings. Hamstrings are hip extensors and eccentric brakes. And you think, what's an eccentric brake? If I'm running, right? If I'm running and my hamstrings don't work, I probably run like this, right? Because my leg keeps kicking out because my hamstring's not doing what it's supposed to. But I know when I run, that doesn't happen. What happens is, as I come up here, my hamstring acts as a brake and keeps my leg from extending. So when we start looking at the function of the hamstring when we're in the swing phase is eccentric control. If you go and read, you can make it even more complicated. Franz Bosch will tell you it's just isometric. It's just holding, all it's going to do is hold its position. But it's clearly not trying to pull your heel to your butt. It's trying to keep your heel from going away from your butt. It's doing the literal opposite of what most people would tell you it's doing. And that's the thinking part. And this is where I said it does get a little bit, I'm going to make it a little bit more complicated for you. Because we're going to look at adductor magnus, right? Adductor magnus is, when now, I'm going to take something that I said was simple, I'm going to make it complicated. But when I push off, glutes, quads, hamstrings, everything's functioning as an extensor. The third most powerful extensor is my adductor magnus. If you look at this, I wish I should have pulled the article title up, but there's a really good article they talk about. The adductor magnus is actually, they talk about it as a fourth hamstring. And it's probably much more functionally a hamstring than an adductor. Because it adducts, if we think glute max, extends, and will abduct and externally rotate. Adductor magnus extends, adducts, and internally rotates. The net effect of doing that in running is that the glute gets neutralized, the adductor gets neutralized, and we go straight back. So it's basically one's trying to pull me out, one's trying to pull me in, they're all trying to pull me back, they all work together. It's this synergies of muscles that makes all this stuff go. Because again, we think about what it taught us, right? Adduction, abduction, right? Does anybody think that this happens? Right? No, it's a concept to get you to try to learn something. That never happens. Think about any activity where you're doing anything and say, have you ever seen anybody perform like a straight leg abduction or a straight leg adduction? And somebody said, well, yeah, kind of when you kick the soccer ball. No, it's not. It's flexion, adduction, combined with a little bit of leg extension. It's a synergy of stuff working together. It's not, and then people wonder, the crazy thing about it is, people wonder why rehab doesn't work all the time. And you have somebody who gets hurt, or they hurt their hip, and they spend all this time doing all these stupid abduction exercises, then they go out and get hurt again. Or they hurt their hamstring, and then they spend all this time doing all these, leg curls trying to get stronger, and they go out and they pull their hamstring again. Like, yeah, I mean, if you train a muscle in the wrong function, when you go back to function, you'll hurt the same muscle again. Because it doesn't work. We've known this, and I think it's interesting. We've been doing this more than 20 years, but, and somebody asked this yesterday in the practicals, you'll still find big clubs all over the world that are doing this wrong, that are still doing, old, isolated, outdated stuff where you think, I can't believe anybody does that, but they do. So, I already said that, sorry. And this is what's really important. Everything, and I stole these slides probably, again, maybe 20 years ago from Mike Clark, who developed all the NASM texts, but I love these slides when he talked about this idea, in this particular, everything changes when you stand on one leg. So when I go to here, and I suddenly do this, all of a sudden now my adductor becomes a stabilizer, my glute medius becomes a stabilizer, my quadratus lumborum on this side becomes a stabilizer. All of those are going to prevent transverse movement. All of those are going to prevent frontal movement, and all of those are going to stabilize me so that I can execute that sagittal movement, that one leg squat that we showed you. And this is why when people look, why am I such a huge fan of one leg squats? Because it's making things happen the way I want them to happen. It's making the stabilizers stabilizers. It's making the neutralizers neutralizers. When people ask me, why aren't you a fan of two leg squats? Well, I'm not a fan of two leg squats because I don't know when this happens a lot. When you think about activities, sporting skills, again, some daily living stuff, yeah. If you've got, I think that every husband, every wife, everybody should be able to squat down and stand up. Should everybody be able to squat down and stand up with 200 kilos? No. I don't think that makes any difference. I think once you can squat down and stand up with a reasonable amount of external load, then you should be getting on one leg, because that's where you're going to have to get in and out of your car and go up and down stairs and do all these things that you need to do that are going to be really functional, right? So, we look at like glute medius, big stabilizer, really important muscle, but it's important not because it's an abductor, which is what we were told it was in anatomy class, but because it's a stabilizer and because it's going to help you to prevent that frontal plane translation of your pelvis. And the same idea here, what they call the deep longitudinal subsystem. If you think, when I'm walking, right, my perineals and my anterior tibialis have to be active to keep my foot in the right place. And as my foot comes down, my calf has to be active, my hamstring has to be active, my glute has to be active, and what it's going to actually do, which is really interesting, is it's going to transfer force right up into this, what they call posterior oblique subsystem. Because when I'm moving, again, it's diagonal, it's this glute, it's my thoracolumbar fascia, and then it's going into my opposite side lat. And again, we see people and we see the way they move. And we know what bad movement looks like, right? I always think, like, if you're trying to teach people to skip, if somebody skips like this, you automatically know that person's not a very good athlete, right? Because their nervous system isn't working the way it's supposed to. So it's not complicated, but again, this is Jonathan Bender, who was a first-round pick in probably early 2000s. Believe it or not, he's 7 feet tall. Just so you can get some conception. But again, it's that same idea. What does he need? He needs to be able to handle load on one foot. He needs to be able to balance. He needs to be able to stabilize. It never changes, right? And if we want to get strong, this is Ben Bruno, who some of you may know, some of you may follow him on Instagram. He's developed a really cool following. But this is interesting because this is 305 pounds. So this just shows you sort of the extremes that these things can go to when we start talking about unilateral strength. But he's got, those are 85-pound dumbbells. And I think he's got, so 85 and 85 is 170. So he's got about 135 pounds of weight vests on. So 60 kilos, give or take, and just invest besides the dumbbells that are in his hand. And he's going to bang out, I don't know how many he does. Maybe he does, I think it's 6 in that video, right? But I look at that and think, if I want to get strong, that makes so much more sense than this, right? Because in the first video, when you watch Ben, I'm thinking, is there any chance Ben's going to get hurt doing that? In my mind, I'm like, nope, none at all. Pretty much 0. If I look at this thing, is there any chance that guy's going to get hurt? I'm like, yep. I mean, eventually, if that guy keeps squatting like that for a long enough period of time, he will be hurt. And this is why so many of us are hurt. I've been there. Okay, and that's when people think like they're always like, oh, I have to find the right word, but we were talking about Sylvia was talking about how to translate one of the words that I used in the presentation that'll come up later. I'm going to try not to use it, but people would think like, oh, Mike Boyle's, he wants you to do one-legged stuff because he's not tough. He's not a tough guy. He's a sissy. He wants you to do everything easy and light. And that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is doing things smart. Because there's way too many of us that beat ourselves up like I did in the 80s. And then suddenly in the 90s woke up and realized, oh, that wasn't necessarily a really good idea. Then we started to take those concepts and apply them to everybody. Initially to our athletes. Most of what we started with here was with athletes. But now this is what we do. If you took the CFSC course yesterday, this is what we do with our normal adult population. We're trying to get people strong enough where they can do the things that we need to do them on one leg, right? So if we look at, and this is Allie again, but it's, and you're talking about one of the world's greatest movers who was struggling to learn basic movements when I wouldn't let her do things fast. It was really interesting. I used to look at her and think, I have no idea how you can do what you do at the rate of speed that you do it, and then be so bad at some of these things that I'm asking you to do that I think are really simple. But we went back with her as basic as you can possibly get. But if you look at Amanda, now Amanda was on our our gold medal winning team, which I guess was 18. But now that's 55 pounds. It's just a little under half her body weight. But it's the same idea. It's unilateral. It's using those muscles as extensors. It's asking those muscles to do the things that they do. It's asking the stabilizers to do the things that they do. We had a long discussion about this the other day online, and someone was saying, well, I don't like that straight leg deadlift exercise because it's really hard to balance. And my thought process was the complete opposite. I really like that straight leg deadlift exercise because it's really hard to balance. And I'm going to keep hammering that pattern with everybody because I want them. Because when we think of the inability to be on one leg and we say, well, that, if I can't do that, I don't have good balance. I don't think that's really balance. I think what that really means is I don't have really good functional strength. I don't have stabilizers that stabilize the way I want them to. I don't have neutralizers that neutralize the way I want them to do. I don't have prime movers that act in the way that I want them to. So I've got to be able to kind of hammer this stuff home. But, you could look at this and think, but some people like, oh, just do Romanian deadlifts. You're going to get the same thing. Like, you're not going to get the same thing. You're going to get twice as much load on your back, which is a problem. You're going to get half as much load on each leg. And you don't have any need for these so important stabilizing and neutralizing muscles. And as I said, that explains exercises like this. So if you just watch the first segment of this video clip, this is what we would call a one-arm, one-leg row. I love one-arm, one-leg rows. Can we get that to run? Will that one not run? No? Some of the older ones won't. But, effectively, I could have somebody row. I could have that person standing on 2 legs and doing this with one arm and one cable. But as soon as I do this, say, okay, now stand opposite here. Now, when we talk about these subsystems, this anatomical explanation of how things work, as soon as I put them on one foot, perineal, anterior tibialis, glute, hamstring, thoracolumbar fascia, all that stuff is working. I've got all the right stabilizers working. I've got all the right neural patterns working. And Kevin, I don't know if Kevin's doing his the brain talk next, but you know, I really think, like I said, so much of what we do from a strength and conditioning standpoint is probably neurally confusing for people. I think we've spent a lot of time trying to make people worse, to be honest. And like I said, what about two-leg squats? You know, would I say never do two-leg squats? No. I would tell you, in all honesty, the ability to bend at the knees demonstrates great functional movement ability. When you think about FMS and Gray Cook and Lee Burton and these guys and looking at overhead squat, I want everybody should be able to do this. No problem. I think that's a really good thing. I think every adult, every child, every athlete, I think the problem comes, as I said earlier, when we start thinking that we need to load that pattern with everybody is where we have a problem. I'm going to look at that pattern and think, once that person can do what they need to do for a daily living stuff, then I'm going to get that person in a unilateral stance. Whether it's just simply split stance or whether it's actually a one-leg squat stance, I'm going to get those in there. Because one of the things that we do know, if you can't squat, you have problems. Like if you can't do that bodyweight squat that I just did, that's a problem. It means that you probably have, more than anything, one, you might just be weak. Two, you might have some joint restrictions. Because one of the things that we do talk about all the time when it comes to injuries is hip mobility is something that you lose. And that's why, again, when you look at our system, there's so much emphasis on hip mobility and on foam rolling and on all these stretching and things to try to get people mobile, because initially when we start out, we can comfortably do that. And then suddenly, like when you're like me, you're in your 50s or you're almost in your 60s, you realize, oh my God, I can't bend over anymore. I can't move my hips the way that I need to move them. So yes, it is important that we maintain hip mobility and that our beginners can do this. Right? When we start kids, like, so if I'm an academy guy with a soccer academy, I'm going to start out with bilateral squatting. Because it's really good, it's a good basic exercise. That's actually my son, he's like 12 in that video. He's about a foot taller right now, which is crazy. But we're gonna start out with really basic bilateral stuff with them because they're not even strong enough to handle it yet. But when we get to a certain point, like my son will hit a certain point in the next year or so where we won't do any bilateral stuff anymore. Or maybe we just continue to deadlift a little bit. But if you look at, if you look at like the next one, this is, I said Hillary Knight, probably the best female player in the world, but she's having some hip problems. She's not handling being on one leg too much, but that's a 100-pound dumbbell. And she just rips off 20 squats with a 100-pound dumbbell, like not very hard. The nice thing about that, what we would call goblet squatting, I'm a much bigger fan of goblet squatting than I am of any other style of squatting, because the goblet is producing a flexion force for which we have to counter with an extension force. The other things that I don't like about squatting, I don't like the compression of the bar on your back. I don't like the shear production that happens when you lean forward. Like, there's lots of things I don't like, and I really dislike 7-foot-long bars because they're really good torque producers. And you realize your back doesn't like compression, your back doesn't like shear, your back doesn't like torque, your back doesn't like being in those kind of positions, right? Your back does not like this. Really good way to get hurt. So, am I anti-squatting? Yep. I'm pro-squatting and anti-squatting all at the same time. I'm really pro-squatting for beginners. Everybody should be able to squat. Everybody should get strong in that squat pattern. I'm really anti-squatting for people as they get stronger. Once people get to a certain point, when you can do one-leg squats, I'm probably not going to ask you to do two-leg squats anymore. But it may take a while for you to be able to do that. And this is interesting, because you talk about the idea, I say, when you're looking for stuff, you find it. This is Frans Bosch, who's a Dutch, I guess he would call himself a sprint coach, not a strength and conditioning coach. But one of the things that he says in his book is not only is the value of deep squats questionable, but so is the claim that double leg squats are particularly suitable for improving strength in the legs. Strength in the back muscle may be the limiting factor rather than strength in the legs, and so double leg squats may in fact be a maximal strength exercise for the back muscles. I absolutely believe that. And when people fail, if you watch all those videos or pictures that we're showing you, it's their back that fails. It's not their legs that fail. Very rarely, if you're a power lifter and you've watched lots of people squat and you've been to lots of meets, you don't see people super upright going through the bottom. You see people failing forward. And the crazy thing about the bilateral people is they're like, that means you got to get your back stronger. I'm like, no, that just may mean it's a bad idea, right? That may mean maybe we don't need to do that anymore, as opposed to you just have to get your back stronger to be able to get your legs stronger. And then when I show you the guy split squatting 500 pounds on one leg easy, it's got to make you think about this whole neural idea that we're talking about. So the basic idea, there's a better way. You only move on one leg at a time, so you want to work to be able to do that one leg squat that we showed you, but you've got to be able to progress. So for most people, this is going to be step one, just a basic split squat. I love split squats. I'm starting to like split squats better than anything else. Because the reason we went, and I think, so if you look at here, and this is an old one, but hopefully this, yeah. So this is Jesse Vetter, who was a goalie in a bunch of Olympics for us. I used to like this exercise more, and the reason I did was because our really good athletes who were using a lot of weight used to complain in split squatting about their back toe, their big toe hurting. But then I realized that was because we were up to like 280 pounds, and that was what was making their big toe hurt. So when we go back to that split squat that you saw first, we can go a really long way. Most of our people can get up to a 100-pound goblet split squat and not complain about their toe. So we've gone back. I'm doing much more split squatting than I am doing rear foot elevated split squatting. Even though most people would associate, you know, they think Mike Boyle and they think rear foot elevated split squat. The reality is we're probably doing a lot more regular split squat. This is what's also interesting. Okay? Because we do talk about the idea, right? We say, you know, everybody's got the same bones, everybody's got the same muscles. Not really. Everybody doesn't really have the same bones. Everybody has similar bones, like we all have a femur, but those are two femurs. And if you look at those are pretty darn different looking femurs, right? One of those femurs has a neck that's almost straight up 90, one's 45. Those people are going to move differently. Those people are going to squat differently. If you listen, a lot of what Stuart McGill is talking about now is that you can look at people literally probably in Brazil. Everybody in Brazil probably squats similarly. And everybody in Scotland probably squats similarly. And everybody, they said, like in Eastern Europe, Bulgarians are really good deep squatters. Also really good Olympic lifters. If you find people that have good hip structure for deep squat, you'll find countries that have good Olympic lifting. If you find people, and this McGill said, if you think like Scotland, England, British Isles, not very many good Olympic lifters. And not very many hips that are structured for deep squatting. So this anatomy gives you another reason to realize why squatting is not easy for everybody, and why we, again, and I'm hoping Bruno's doing a great job in there, but you know, we talk about the idea of trying to bang a square peg into a round hole. We do that a lot in strength and conditioning. We find an exercise that we like, and we try to make everybody do what we like, which is not very smart. This is my favorite picture, okay? Megan is on your left, Sydney is on your right. Megan is 5 feet tall, Sydney is 5 feet 11 inches tall. Okay? So we're looking at them and thinking, they have very different bones, right? Obviously. Different bone lengths. Look at picture 2. That's Sydney and Megan sitting on 12-inch boxes next to each other. They are the exact same height when they sit down. The differences in their bones is contained entirely in their lower body. And if you look, just look at Sydney's legs compared to Megan's legs. Megan's going to be a really good squatter. Megan's going to be somebody that I probably could make into a good little power lifter if I wanted to. Sydney's someone that's going to get hurt if I try to make her into a power lifter. Yet we've got two females, exact same bones. Everybody's got a tibia, everybody's got a femur, everybody's got a spine, but drastically different. I'm reading Sports Gene right now. I'm hoping if Sports Gene is translated into Portuguese, get it, because it's amazing. You know, Epstein talks a lot about the differences in structure and how much in taller populations, the difference is almost entirely in their legs. If you look, and you know, anybody that spent time around, I learned this lesson from our college basketball players, and I learned it completely by accident. I had one again, and at that time I was a square peg round hole guy. Everybody squatted. All our basketball players squatted. And I remember sitting in my office talking to one of the players who was 6'8", I'm 5'9". And I'm talking to him, I'm looking straight at him as I'm talking, and I'm like, Jason, I never thought about the fact that we were the same height sitting down. And he's like, oh, I never did either. That's pretty funny. And then he stands up, and he's literally almost a foot taller than me, and it's all legs. And then I kind of looked at him, and I thought, and I think that explains why you've been complaining to me about not liking squatting. And I said, because you're never going to be good at this. Like someone like Sydney, she's never going to be good at squatting because the segments aren't made to be good at squatting. But she'll be really good at split squatting. Split squatting, it will make no difference at all. The structural difference. Regular, bilateral, back-loaded squatting, it will make a massive difference. And she will, if we did it, she would eventually get hurt, right? So, I look at this, I say, even with front squat, why would you do this, right? When you can do this. And this is Daniel. Daniel had actually had hip surgery and had come over from England to rehab with a friend of mine, and then he said, will you kind of handle the strength training part for Daniel? But the difference was he was the classic, Premier League striker, great goal scorer who doesn't want to lift weights. That is, again, if most of you, obviously soccer, Brazil, they're synonymous, right? This is the guy that you're going to get. Super talented, naturally fast, doesn't want to pick up a weight because he's afraid something bad is going to happen. Do you know why guys like him are afraid something bad is going to happen? Because there's too many idiot strength coaches out there making him do things that are bad for him, right? And not looking at him and thinking, does he need to have 400 pounds on his back? Nope. Does he want to have 400 pounds on his back? Nope. But they hire a strength coach, right? And the strength coach comes in and he's strong and he's like, everybody's going to squat. And usually within 2 weeks, that strength coach is unemployed because the players revolt, right? But I take someone like Daniel and I say, you're not going to never lift heavy weights. He's like, oh, that's great. I love that. No, we're going to get really good at this exercise, which actually is much harder than the heavyweight one that he doesn't want to do. And then when he gets good at that, I'm going to keep sneaking little bits of weight on him. Hey, why don't you do that with let's put this 10-pound belt on. You can do that, right? Let's hold 10-pound dumbbells instead of 5-pound dumbbells. You can do that. And we're going to literally sneak him up to being strong, and he doesn't know what's happening. As opposed to coming in and saying, we're going to do squats and deadlifts, and we're going to do cleans. And then wonder why, of course, these guys are all going to be like, no, we're not. And the more money they make, the easier it is to say no, right? The guy that makes the most money is just going to be like, nope. And the manager's got to look and go, oh, did you hear him say no? Just so you know, that meant no. He's not going to do that. So we've got to realize, the better athletes we're working with, the more important it is for us to be able to understand this functional training concept. So when we start thinking about hip extension, we want to develop hip extension. So that would be, we'd look at that, one leg squatting, split squatting as knee dominant. If we look at the idea of hip dominant from a function standpoint, we want hip extension strength and we want eccentric control of leg extension. That's what we talked about from a running standpoint, right? So here, now some people would say, okay, you don't like leg curls? I didn't say I don't like leg curls. I said I don't like leg curl machines. I really like this eccentric slide board leg curl idea a lot, okay? So we're going to say to somebody, bridge up, and then I want you to extend for 5 seconds. I want you to develop that eccentric break that is your hamstring, okay? And some people might look at that and say, oh, that's not a very functional exercise. And I'd be like, yeah, you're right. He's lying down. He's only moving one joint. That's single joint exercise, really. But the other thing that I'll tell you, I don't care. Like, I don't care about the rules. I don't care about what the book says. I care about what's working, what's smart. And when I want to start thinking, okay, I need to expose this guy to some eccentric strength work for his hamstring, this is going to be a really good way to do that. The important thing to see, and can you just run that video one more time? The most important thing here is that your hamstring has to work in concert with your glute. So if I'm looking at what's going on right here, I've got isometric glute, right? I've got to squeeze. I've got to be able to hold that hip extension. I've got an isometric hamstring contraction that's gradually becoming an eccentric hamstring contraction, but that's going to be done in the presence of that isometric glute contraction. That's probably a lot more similar to what's happening when somebody's sprinting than if I flipped that person over and had them do a leg curl. Once I flip them over, makes no difference what their glutes are doing at all. There's no need for them to be able to coordinate that isometric contraction, that hard contraction of their glutes with their hamstrings. So we can look at these exercises and say, even though it's a leg curl, it's a completely different kind of leg curl. The other thing that we've started doing from a hip extension standpoint, and this is something that makes so much sense that it's ridiculous. It took us, I'm a little bit ashamed, it took us 20 years. This is Jack Eichel, so he's a ice hockey player, captain of the Buffalo Sabres in the National Hockey League. That's 680 pounds, right? But one of the things that we've started to realize in the last couple of years, and this, hopefully all of you will have this I'm really stupid moment with me. But for the longest time, we just kept going up and down and up and down, or up and down and up and down, and then wondering, no one fell, wondering why we weren't getting faster. And then when we start thinking about the idea of vectors, okay, if I keep having somebody go up and down this way and then wonder why they can't go that way, I'm not very smart. And I'm not very smart, trust me, because for 20-something years, I did exactly that. Not even 30, 35 years. We went up and down, up and down, up and down, and then wondered, how come nobody's any better at going this way? And then suddenly we said, well, what if we took the sled and made the sled like a strength exercise? And started to work on that person's ability to push in that direction that we wanted them to push in. Again, not at all brilliant, actually pretty darn dumb. But the last 2 years, first heavy exercise we do on a lower body strength day, sled pushing. And if you look at sled pushing, what's sled pushing? Well, actually, it's kind of like a unilateral leg press, isn't it? Right? It's the same idea, except instead of having somebody lying on their back pushing this way, I've put them right in that acceleration position. And then I've said, put force down into the ground really hard. Get good and strong at putting force into the ground, into the right position. So this is where we start talking about, we keep going back to this idea of functional training, understanding anatomy, looking at what we're doing, and trying to keep connecting the dots. And again, your dots may be a little different than my dots, but not nearly as much as we think they are. The next thing we started doing, sled sprinting. Same idea, right? I want to get powerful going in the horizontal. So what am I going to do? Obviously, I'm going to sprint with a sled. The interesting thing here, and this could be a whole talk, and it's way too sports specific, but just for those of you that are in, how many people here are in the sports world, would you say? Just so I can, yeah, so we're going to say less than 25% of you are probably in the sports world. But just the thing we need to understand here is rate of speed in this sled run matters. Rate of speed in the sled push doesn't matter at all. We want a really slow, heavy marching. In a sled run, basically we want them to be able to run under 150% of their best time for the same distance. So to give you like that, so my daughter, who's in that picture, runs about 1.6 seconds for 10 yards. That means the weight on the sled can't make her slower than 2.4 seconds. If it does, it's too heavy. And that's all I'll say, because it doesn't matter. Enough anyway. But again, I love this next exercise. I love one leg straight leg deadlifts. So remember Winston? Right? But again, now this kid, Winston Justice, played in the NFL, played at USC. He's probably, I don't know, he's 300 pounds, give or take, right? And he's probably only got 40 or 50 pound dumbbells in each hand. But the basic idea, what do I want? I want him to be strong in unilateral stance. I want that hip dominant, hip extension pattern to be strong while he is on one leg. So if someone said to me, what are the two most important things you're going to do? One leg straight leg deadlift, one leg squat. Those are going to be the two most important things I'm going to do. If I get to the point with athletes where someone said, okay, we don't have a lot of time, okay, we're going to do one leg squats and one leg straight leg deadlifts. Because I'm going to take care of that hip dominant and knee dominant patterns that I need, and I'm going to do those in the presence of the stability that I want. I'm going to make the right stabilizers and the right neutralizers become a good active part of that pattern. If you said to me, but I work in fitness, I'm going to say, okay, then I really want them to get good at split squat and one leg straight leg deadlift. Maybe not one leg squat in fitness, because one leg squat's going to take some time, but I'm going to still be working in those unilateral patterns once I've gotten basic mastery of bilateral. The other thing we've started to do here is we've definitely started to pay more attention to different hip dominant patterns. So I like this. This is a very glute oriented hip dominant pattern. We're going to do this double leg initially and then single leg initially. I am not a fan of the bilateral hip thrust with the big heavy bar across your body at all. Because, you know, again, if you watch most people do that, they don't do it well. But I think when you get into the, like if you get into that shoulder elevated unilateral version of this exercise, this is another one, you know, when you think in basic stuff that everybody should be able to do. And all this really is, when you look, it's bridging, right? It's single leg bridging. We're just making single leg bridging harder. We're going to spend a lot of time in the practical today just talking about bridging and talking about motor control, talking about what I want to have happening during bridging. But with an hour and a half here, we don't have time for that. Well, time flies when you're having fun. I got 25 minutes left. And like I said, adduction just doesn't happen. Like this stuff does not happen. So don't worry about it. You know, again, if you're involved in the rehab world, don't worry about it. If you're somebody that's involved in the fitness world, definitely don't worry about it. But look at this. This is Hillary again. I would call that functional ab and adduction. So when we start thinking about sled marches, lateral sled marches, because when we think, and this is where you go back to the anatomy book, right? We think about, in Kendall's book, Muscles, Testing, and Function, because people were saying, okay, what are the best functional anatomy book? The best functional anatomy book you can probably get, the best two, is Kendall's, Florence Kendall. It's called Muscles, Testing, and Function. So it's Muscles, Testing, and Function. There is a new version. You need the new version because we're always learning new things from an anatomy standpoint. The other one is Shirley Sarman's Diagnosis and Treatment of Movement Impairment Syndromes. Both of those do a really good job of incorporating functional anatomy into what we're talking about. And Sarman is S-A-H-R-M-A-N-N, in case anybody's interested. I have no idea. My guess is those books are not translated, but I don't know enough about the translation world over here. But the important thing to understand when we think about function is that you have muscles that help you to flex and adduct. You have muscles that help you to extend and adduct. You don't have any muscles that really are pure adductors. The reason that we see the problem, the pubic symphysis type problems that we have in soccer, is because of that flexion, adduction action of striking a soccer ball. Okay? And you can't solve that problem by having that person do isolated long lever adduction. But I think you'll go a long way towards solving those problems when you start to move those muscles into patterns like this. Next year, that sled crossover will probably be a mandatory strength exercise for us. That's the other thing I've started to look at, is that I need to get sled crossovers in the workout more. I need to get slide board in the workout more. And we've already pushed sled pushing into the workout more. Like those are things. And I hate to say really good functional exercises, because that sounds kind of cheesy. I don't know how cheesy translates also into Brazilian. There's probably going to be some word for that. But I do think they're really good. Like we can sit here and say, hey, there's a really good core of really good functional exercises. One leg straight leg deadlift, split squat, sled push, slide board, you know, that are going to actually get people doing things the way they're supposed to be doing them. If I had soccer, Sue, you're going to love this one. Slater. And Anthony, Anthony was smart ahead of his time. But he was starting to look at, okay, I would look at that and think, you got someone with groin problems, that's a good exercise. Because that's a combination of flexion and adduction. That's something that somebody needs to be able to do as opposed to isolated adduction. So just, what I'm trying to get you to do is think about this idea of functional anatomy. How does the muscle really work? What is it actually doing? What muscles are actually creating that action, right? And we could even look at this idea if we talk about just pressing. Really simple, right? Functional pressing. Ask somebody to press in standing. Again, if I've got adults, that's one of my favorite adult exercises, because I want them to work unilateral, but I want them to have to be able to use their core as stabilizers. I want them to have to be able to be on their feet. Not complicated, but we still, just so you don't get it wrong, I mean, we still have people bench pressing and dumbbell bench pressing. I'm not totally anti-regular strength training, This, I don't know if Carlos has started to import this piece yet. This is like my favorite piece of equipment in the world. This thing is called, it's called an AT Sports Flex. And if you can run this video twice for me, that would be really cool, because I want you to be able to see. If you look at here, what you've basically got is a big pulley down there and one rope. This, if you look at that exercise, we can take anybody who says their shoulders hurt when they press, give them that piece of equipment and their shoulders won't hurt when they press. I have had, I will say, 100% success ratio with people who say, I can't do a push-up, I can't bench press, I can't do that. We give them that little contraption off of a pulley and boom, they can press automatically. The Perform Better US people have it. I'm sure Carlos can figure out some way to get it. I don't sell it, but it's really cool. So just to clear up the confusion, we lift weights, okay? Functional training is a thought process. You don't have to throw away everything that you're currently doing. You don't have to decide, okay, am I going to believe everything Mike Boyle says and throw my program away? And I didn't put that quote in, but Ron Ruska, who will get mentioned in Michael Mullen's talk, I'm sure at some point, talks about the idea of finding things that make your existing program better. What I'm trying to do here for you guys is give you things that are going to make your existing program better. All of you in here have something that you're doing right now, some way that you train people. And more than likely, that's working for you. All of you are also probably looking for some way to make that process better. That's what we're all here for over the weekend, is to try to give you some pieces to make that existing process better. Try to give you some thoughts to make that existing process better. Like I said, I really believe when you start to understand functional anatomy, it's that big aha moment of, oh, I get it now. This makes perfect sense. And that's what I want you to have, and I hope you're going to have that when Mike talks. I hope you're going to have it when Sue talks. I hope you're going to have it when Kevin talks. I hope you're going to have it when Brendan talks. That like, okay, this is starting to make sense to me. The biggest thing we have to worry about is kind of the built-in resistance in our heads. This is the way I've always done it. This is the way I was taught to do it. Because for most of us, that's going to be the thing that we have to fight against the hardest, is that thought process of, but we've always done this like this. I've been really good at not getting caught up in that. I always said, you know, again, I'm an unavowed thief. When I go and watch somebody who's smarter than me, I steal their stuff. I did it. I met Sue when she was just a little baby. She was 20 whatever years old, right? Going to Athletes Performance, meeting Mark Verstegen. I came back from that first visit and said, there's 4 or 5 things he does better than us. We need to do these differently. We started talking about, we got to build med ball walls so we can throw med balls. We started thinking about, you know, we need to work more on lateral movement. You know, we're too conventional. These guys are ahead of us. I look at that all the time and think that's the way I'm going to be. I'm going to look at everybody who's being successful and say, what are they doing? What are they doing better than me? And then immediately, how much of it can I steal? How much of it can I copy? How much of it is going to be immediately useful for me? And I don't have any, I'm not ashamed of that at all. As long as you give credit where credit is due. That's, if anybody's been following my Instagram, you'll see I have a guy in Bosnia or someplace that is not giving credit where credit is due and just posting my stuff. But most of the time that's okay. Right? I like this idea. I talk about this all the time. I talk about the mirror and the window. The best way to figure out how good a trainer you are is to think of your clients as the mirror of you. Okay, when I look at my clients, what do I feel like when I look at them? Do I see people that move well? Do I see people that are healthy? You know what I mean? So am I just beating people up for a living? Or am I making people better? I love the process of making people better. I love talking to our clients when they say things like, I feel so much better after coming here. That's our goal. Someone asked yesterday, what do you guys try to do? What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to change your life. Even in here, I'm trying to change your life. I'm trying to teach you things that are going to make you better, help you make more money, help you have more success, right? When I'm with my clients, it's the exact same thing. I'm trying to make them better. I'm trying to enhance the quality of their life. I don't care how sweaty they get. I don't care how big their arms are. I don't care if they tell me, oh, I was really tired after the workout. I don't care about any of that. Makes absolutely no difference to me. What matters to me is what somebody, I like when people say to me, when I get out of bed in the morning, I feel so much better. Or my neck used to hurt all the time, now it doesn't hurt anymore. Or my back used to hurt all the time, now it doesn't hurt anymore. That's the stuff that makes you money. Beating people up, making people tired, it'll make you a little bit of money in the short term, but it won't last, right? The other thing, think about your clients as the window that everybody else sees you through. So I always said, imagine that your gym had windows like this that were open all the time. And the only way people could evaluate you was by standing outside the window and looking at you. So being out there and looking in and going, oh, is he a good trainer or is he a shitty trainer? Like, what is he, does he know what he's doing or is he an idiot, right? But all they can do is look in the window. You should be thinking about that every day when you're looking at people in your gym or in your facility or wherever you're training people and say, what's the person outside the window thinking when they're looking at me, doing my job? Am I doing my job well? Am I engaged? Am I smiling? Are my clients moving well? Am I not on my phone, right? All of those things, all that stuff matters because that's how you're going to create your reputation. Last couple things, and then we'll give you guys time to ask a couple of questions. Read. Read, 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 read. Learn in your area of strength. Read 6 to 12 books a year on leadership or your field of specialization. Continuing to learn in an area where you're already an expert prevents you from becoming jaded and unteachable. Okay? 6 to 12 books a year. I would tell you try to read 12. Try to read one a month. I would tell you to split them half and half between personal development and professional reading. I think most of us go down one road or the other. There's some people who are like, oh, I'm going to read Super Training again. Look, if you've read Super Training, don't read it again. And if you know you're not great on the personal development side, read 2 personal development books for every 1 training book that you're going to read. But read. Sorry, actually I'm going to go back one. This Brian Tracy said, if you read 30 minutes a day, every day, at the end of the year, you'll be one of the smartest people in your field. It's absolutely true. It's scary, but because people don't read. All you need to do is spend 30 minutes a day, 10 pages, and suddenly you're going to realize, wow, I know a lot more than a lot of people because I read 12 more books. When I ever talk to people about books all the time, they're like, I'm always like, did you read this book? Did you read this book? Did you read this book? And people are like, no, I haven't read any of those books. And I'm like, that's why I'm here, because I read all those books. I read it, I thought about it, I incorporated it, right? You've got to be doing it. If you are one of those people, and I know there are some people like, well, I don't like to read. Usually the person who doesn't like to read is not a good reader. And that's okay. I feel for you if you're not a good reader, if you're a slow reader or whatever it is. Maybe you've got a learning disability, you don't read well. Audiobooks. Okay, there's no excuse for not listening. We all can listen. So if you're not enjoying reading, try to figure out some way to get these products on audio. Some suggested readings from a motivational standpoint. Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I would be 100% certain that that is translated into Portuguese. Although I have not looked it up, I'd be shocked if it wasn't. Whenever anybody asks me what's the best coaching book to read, How to Win Friends and Influence People. When you read it, you might be under-impressed by its simplicity because it's going to talk about things like smiling and calling people by their name. But that's the stuff that's really, really important. That's the stuff that's going to create a great business for you. That's the stuff that's going to create success for you. It won't be what you know from a training standpoint, trust me. It will be your ability to interact with people. Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Again, I'm going to put money on it if I go on to Amazon right now that it's in Portuguese. Again, another amazing, those are like the basic self-help books that people should be reading. Another one is Brian Tracy's Millionaire Habits. From a professional standpoint, everybody should, if you can get it, invest in that Diagnosis and Treatment of Movement Impairment Syndromes. It is a dense book. It is not easy to read. I tell people, I've read the first 60 pages probably 3 or 4 times. I've read it, and then I've read it over again, and then I've read it over again. And every time I read it over again, I get a little more out of it because Shirley's really smart, and it takes a little bit of time to kind of dial into what she's talking about conceptually. Myers Anatomy Trains, Thomas Myers, really, really good book. And again, I still don't think it's the perfect functional anatomy book, but I do think it's going to help you to understand how these things relate in the body. Stuart McGill, Low Back Disorders, or I think the new one is called Back Mechanic, any of McGill's books. Because again, if you can understand back pain, you're way ahead of the game. And I don't know, I'm not Brazilian, but in the US, 80% of people have back pain. So people that can deal with back pain are going to be very successful. McGill's the master of that. He's another one of those guys that, I just listened to him talk, and as soon as he was done speaking, I wrote down all these things we weren't going to do anymore. I was like, okay, no more crunchies, no more Russian twists. And I went back to the staff meeting and I said, all this stuff is out. And everybody looked at me and was like, what do you mean all this stuff is out? And I said, I mean all this stuff is out. We're not doing it anymore. I just listened to the smartest guy I've ever listened to talk about low back health, and he said not to do this. One thing I am smart enough to do, I am a super good cheater. Okay, I recognize who's smarter than me, and then I steal their ideas. Instant. Didn't take me 24 hours to steal Stu's stuff. If you deal with team sports, Charlie Francis Training for Speed is available all over the internet now, unfortunately. I would recommend you, because I think it's his wife that sells it, if you can buy it from a paid site, that's going to be good. But 11 minutes. Let's see. I think that's the last one. Yes, that is the last one. So thank you. We have 11 minutes for questions. I want to stay right tight to 11 minutes just so that we understand. Also, when we are done, I know people are very excited about taking pictures and doing that stuff. I want you to listen to Kevin. I promise you I'm going to be here until Sunday. I will take pictures, sign books, do whatever you want to do, but I really don't want you to leave the lectures to get a picture or to get an autograph. I want we're all here. I want you to learn. I want you to listen to these people. I want it to be a really good experience for you and for them. So when we're done, I don't want to sign books and pictures and stuff because Kevin's going to be right up here. So we'll just get him up and we can go. I apologize.